Hello, fiendlings, how the hell are you? The rain is falling, the thunder is booming, and all I want to do is drink coffee and watch The Boys. Alas, there's work to be done. While managing the Black ebooks, I came across a particular problem. You can't update multiple ebooks simultaneously. There's simply no way to do that. So I spent the last week and a half in between family things to create a utility to enable that functionality along with a few niceties that automation provides. The app is called EPUB Mangler, and it's probably only useful for two people, me and someone else. Still, if you want to take a gander and tell me how bad my code is, find it on GitHub. Links are in the show notes. In case you missed it, Evolution released last Friday, and as of this writing, I only have 3 reviews. Since most folks probably haven't yet finished the book, that's to be expected. But if you have read it, please do me a solid and leave a review. You've no idea how much they help. With that, I'm going to get back to editing and rewriting The Black Extinction. Be safe, have a great week, and we'll talk again real soon. Here's episode 18 of The Black, Outbreak.
Chapter 36. The creature, a prisoner of pressure, struggled to find a way out, but there wasn't one. It was trapped by the unyielding air behind it and something metal blocking its way. It couldn't move. For a while, it simply maintained its position and continued dissolving any and all biomatter it could find. When it finally exhausted its pitiful food source, the entity became desperate. Food. Food was what it needed to grow, and without growth, it would cease existing. It manufactured a small, blunt pseudopod and pushed against the barrier. Without any leverage save the pressure behind it, it was an impossible feat. It dissolved the appendage, reabsorbing the matter and adding it back to its hole. The creature pushed again, but fanned itself out into multiple tendrils. This time, it found a chink in the barrier's armor. The liquid found small perforations, microscopic, but there. It pushed against them and was rewarded. The material wasn't metal. It was rubber. The seal quickly dissolved. As it consumed each complex molecule, the seal deteriorated into nothing. The creature grew infinitesimally from the tiny meal. Pressure started escaping from the pipe. Its prison buckled. The creature created another appendage and expended enough energy to harden it. It pushed again, and this time the barrier rose no more than a centimeter. The creature reabsorbed the appendage again and then pushed upward, narrowing its liquid mass until it was less than a millimeter wide. It streamed through the barrier and found freedom. Chapter 37. 14 hours. 14 goddamned hours. Those thoughts kept rolling in her mind over and over again. Dr. Hazel Watchman walked out of the shower, towel wrapped around her chest. Her wet salt and pepper mane hung down past her breasts, and she was going to run a brush through it? No. Was she going to do anything besides putting it in a ponytail? Hell no. The little voice inside her head urged her on, but kept getting drowned out by the last delivery. And it was a strange one. Hazel wasn't sure she ever wanted to go through one of those again. The mother, Gloria Melendez, was 41 years old. Women having children at that age was becoming more and more routine, but mainly because the potential problems were well known. However, it was more difficult when you were 41 and it was your first baby. Not to mention the Nicaraguan woman's hips were narrow as hell. Hazel had figured out after their first meeting that Gloria was going to need a cesarean. But still, there was the labor to deal with and all the normal problems to look out for. Hazel and the nurse monitored the mother and fetus for 9 hours. 9 hours of goddamned labor. And that was after Hazel induced it and then waited. And waited and waited. 3 prior deliveries that day, 1 unscheduled and 2 scheduled, had all gone smoothly. It just had to be the last one of the day to ruin her week. When the baby, Raul, was finally ready for delivery, Hazel had to perform a cesarean and then deal with her first ever postpartum hemorrhage. In all her years of delivering children into the world, she'd never had a situation where the mother started bleeding after delivery. But the Melendez birth just couldn't be routine. At first, Hazel thought she'd nicked an artery while performing the procedure to remove the unborn child. Then she realized the damned placenta hadn't been pulled from the womb, but torn. It took her nearly 20 minutes to find the bleeder and 2 units of blood and fluids to get Melendez back in the safe zone. Worst goddamn night ever. At least the baby was okay. He'd shrieked and cried while she and the nurse worked on his mother. Another nurse had finally come into the room to help out with the baby, but it was up to Hazel to save the new mother's life. She managed it, but it had been a close thing. Too goddamn close. Hazel walked to her temporary locker, opened it up, and removed her street clothes. T-shirt? Check. Jeans? Check. Boots? Sweater? Rain jacket. Oh, and the purse, of course. Don't forget the damn purse. She finished drying her body, flung the towel in the nearest hamper, and began dressing. Once her lower half was garbed, she pulled the wet towel from around her head, tossed it after the other towel, and pulled on the shirt. Her wet hair soaked it immediately, but she didn't care. From what she'd seen through the windows, rain was falling in sheets, punctuated by lightning and rumbling thunder. She tied her hair in a tail and pulled on the sweater. Fully dressed, she closed the locker and turned to leave. Keys in hand, she walked from the locker room and into the delivery lounge. Reclining chairs, a comfy futon, and a refrigerator sat in the empty room. No people, no nurses, no doctors. It seemed as though she was the last to leave. The lounge was where doctors and nurses holed up while waiting for their patients to go through labor. Hazel wondered just how many hours of her life she'd already spent in this room, and how many more would she spend through the rest of her career. Sighing, she opened the door and headed out into the hallway. When the door closed behind her, she stopped in her tracks. There was a smell like a backed-up toilet mixed with overcooked food. Her nostrils wrinkled, nose hairs wilted, and her eyes watered. The door to the lab was partially open. Blood tests, urine tests, every kind of test you could imagine was performed in there. Pregnancies were fraught with possible complications from infections, HIV complications, and even parasites. Getting a leg up on problems before they became life-threatening to mother or baby was damned important, especially for the malpractice lawyers and insurance companies. But this late at night, there was rarely anyone in there. "Hello?" she called. No answer. She was certain the eye-watering stench was coming from the lab. Hazel walked forward to the door and knocked on it. "Hello?" she said again. The door opened wider at her touch, and she peered in. Most of the lights in the lab were off. One workstation, monitor still on and displaying tables of numbers, burned brightly in the dim room. She didn't see anyone inside. She walked further into the room, the smell stronger than ever. She took another step and stopped as a sizzling sound started at the back of the room. Hazel swung her eyes to the nest of shadows beyond the lit workstation. The sound grew louder. Hazel squinted into the darkness. The shadows moved. She took a step backward without thinking. Her foot struck the back of the door and she nearly screamed, adrenaline rushing into her bloodstream. "Hello?" The word came out in a hiss of breath, barely audible even to herself. The shadows seemed to tremble. A crackling sound joined the sizzling. A shape rose from the gloom. Hazel's mind tried to make sense of what she was seeing. A wide branch of darkness, blacker than the shadows, waved in the air. Frozen in fear and awe, she watched the shape coalesce into something alien. A creature that shouldn't exist moved toward her. Hazel was too terrified to scream. When it got within a meter of her, she tried to flee. A tentacle lashed out and took off her head. Soon after, there was nothing left but the keys that had once been in her pocket, her cell phone, and the zipper and rivets from her jeans. Chapter 38. The cool darkness was welcome. The creature sat near the half-open door as it finished consuming its latest meal. It sprouted another set of legs, pulled itself up, and scuttled around the lab, dragging a trail of liquid behind it, the black eating every particle of consumable matter. When it finished with the floor, it scoured the lab tables. Its tentacles found skin cells, cleaning fluid, and the occasional particle of biological matter, but little else. It couldn't consume the metal and glass making up the tables and the equipment, but it dissolved as much of the plastic as it could. It added more to itself, modifying the matter, changing it, transforming it. The creature grew slightly. There wasn't enough food here, not nearly enough. It had to leave the room and find more. Its eye stalks waved in the air and finally found the door. It scuttled across the tiles, its hard, black shell smacking into the tables and knocking over a microscope before it reached the exit. One of its many tentacles reared back and rushed forward. The door opened wide. The creature stepped through and into the hallway. Its multi-jointed, spider-like legs dug into the carpet, dragging trailers of liquid behind its bulk, the carpet smoldering in its wake as it dissolved the consumable matter. With each step, it grew. With each cell it dissolved, it added to its form. By the time it reached the main hallway, it was twice the size it had been when it started in the lab, and it knew more food was just steps away. Chapter 39. Harold somehow managed to fall asleep against the wall. Mathis knew she wouldn't be that way for long. The moment Ellis or that horrible Moore woman hit them on the radio, she'd be up like a shot. He was tired of sitting in the hallway, mainly because it was boring. One of the operating rooms still had the remains of the surgical team, such as they were. The other? 2 corpses. He decided to go visit the dead rather than be annoyed with the living. Through the glass walls he saw the doctors and nurses in the surgery. They still looked the same, glassy-eyed and in shock. At least the one nurse, whatever the hell her name was, had finally stopped wailing. In fact, she looked asleep. Maybe the rest of them would fall asleep too, and wake up to a host of military or police dragging them out into the storm when this was over. If it ever was. He wished Moore would pipe in communications with the SWAT team. At least then he'd have some idea of how they were doing and, more importantly, if they were still alive. They were chasing that thing. The image of its blacker-than-black insectile eyes rotating on even darker stalks made him shiver. That was a memory he was sure he'd have to live with for the rest of his days. With any luck, there would be a lot of them left. Unless that thing comes back down here, he thought. Fuck that, Mathis said aloud and entered the vacant surgery. There was little of interest. Very little. They'd wheeled the corpse from the other surgery into this one. The unfortunate ex-patient lay on the stretcher, a sheet covering his still-open chest. The other patient was still on the OR table, sheet covering him as well. It was cold enough to keep the bodies from stinking up the joint, but he didn't know how long that would last. And speaking of cold, Mathis held his arms around himself and shivered. The room was getting very cold indeed. Either the heater in the building was fried or something else was going on. Maybe that thing had not only destroyed the central heating, but had managed to open a hole in the roof. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Well, this was a waste of time, he said to the empty room. Without the hum of the powerful operating room lights, the whir and beep of machines, and the sounds of cutting, chopping, and low conversation from working doctors, the room was deathly quiet. He was beginning not to like it. He stared up at the ceiling and looked for holes. Nothing. The ceiling tiles were all intact. No exposed ducts, no exposed pipes. It was the way it should be. He turned to walk out, and then stopped. There was a drain in the floor, and another by the sink. Both had biohazard symbols on them. You just dumped the offal on the floor? He wondered. So unhygienic, Mathis grunted. He turned to walk back into the hallway. At least it was warmer in there. For now, anyway. Gurgle, gurgle. He stopped and slowly turned his head. The room was silent again. He stared at the sink at the back of the room, but he didn't think that's where the sound had come from. Gurgle, bloop. Gooseflesh vibrated across his skin, and his spine rattled with fear. Worst of all, he had to piss. Bloop, bloop. He finally knew where the sound was coming from. The drain in the middle of the room. Mathis watched as water slowly rose from the drain and then sucked back into it. Maybe the rain had finally invaded the gutters. Maybe there was a break in the building's water main. Hell, maybe water was rushing up from the sewers and this particular drain led to them. Maybe, just maybe, everything was fucked but fine. They could drown. That would be better than the alternative. Please be flooding, please be flooding, please be flooding. Then there was another sound, like static coming through a pipe. Or maybe, just maybe, it was sizzling. Okay, he said to the room. That's bad. He tapped his headset. Earth to Harrell, come in, Harrell. Chapter 40. A drain gurgled at the opposite end of the building. A streamer of jet black rose through the waste system, through the metal grate and into the room. It was little more than a liter in volume. The moment it finished pulling itself out of the pipe, it coalesced into a small, trembling puddle. The storeroom was darker than pitch. It paused for a moment, and then slid forward. The tile beneath it sizzled as it vacuumed up every dust particle and stray bit of biological matter. It finally encountered something firm, but consumable. The creature didn't bother producing limbs. No reason to. Yet. It continued sweeping the space for more to eat and found a treasure trove of plastic, cardboard, and protein. The storeroom was filled with boxes of birthing supplies, snacks for the staff, diapers, and other nursing paraphernalia. In the darkness, it fed and grew. When it had finally cleared the room of everything it could eat, the large black oil slick trembled like a bowl of jelly. An eye stalk slowly rose from its surface with a crackle and surveyed the surroundings. The pitch-black room might as well have been well lit. It saw the unnatural light glowing beneath the door and the imperfect seals on either side of the jamb. Freedom was through the door. It slid forward to the crack at the bottom and retracted the eye stalk. Once it was on the other side, it would search for more food.